When hope for talks vanishes, what remains is the roar of missiles and a new kind of war. Last night, fragile hopes for negotiations in Budapest collapsed into silence. Instead of headlines about peace, Kyiv was rocked by waves of relentless bombardment. The world watched as the capital endured attack after attack, with explosions echoing from dusk until dawn. This was not just another night of fighting. It marked a sudden, decisive escalation, a shift from the illusion of dialogue to the reality of destruction. There were no more tentative agreements, only the thunder of a military campaign that left no room for misunderstanding. The implications are profound. When war tactics evolve overnight, entire societies can be destabilized in the blink of an eye. If we fail to grasp how quickly peace can disappear, we risk underestimating the scale and speed at which lives, economies, and futures are shattered. Let's examine how this night changed everything and what it means for the future. To understand the real impact of this shift, we need to look beyond the headlines and examine the new strategy unfolding before our eyes. Why was this night in Kyiv not just another attack, but the start of something fundamentally different? The world watched as hopes for renewed negotiations, rumored to include high-level US and Russian meetings, quietly collapsed. In their place came the roar of explosions over the Ukrainian capital, signaling the transition to a new and more brutal phase of the conflict. What unfolded was not a random barrage, but a massive, coordinated assault. For hours, advanced hypersonic missiles and drones targeted the city and beyond. Eyewitnesses described the relentless bombardment as the most destructive and sustained they had ever experienced, leaving the sky ablaze from midnight until dawn. But it was the targets themselves that revealed the true shift. This was not just about military positions. Instead, critical energy facilities, logistical hubs, and core infrastructure, power plants, heating stations, and railways were systematically hit. The goal was clear: to cripple Ukraine's backbone, disrupt civilian life, and undermine both military and economic resilience. Recent diplomacy attempts, even those quietly organized and supported by allies, had already failed. What set this assault apart was its scale and precision. Multiple regions across Ukraine reported simultaneous strikes, and the use of cutting-edge weaponry showed a new level of technical sophistication and intent. The stakes have never been higher. Failing to recognize this evolution in warfare means missing the deeper strategic signals, actions designed not just to win territory, but to exhaust an entire society's capacity to recover or negotiate. The end of diplomatic illusions now means escalation defines the confrontation itself. Now let's uncover the strategy behind these attacks and their broader purpose. To truly grasp what this means for Ukraine and the region, we need to analyze the logic driving these targeted assaults and what they reveal about the long-term goals of the conflict. Is the real war no longer on the front lines, but in the darkened cities and shattered supply chains? Overnight, the conflict in Ukraine entered a new and ruthless phase. Instead of direct clashes between armies, the focus has shifted to disabling infrastructure. Energy grids, railways, and industrial centers across many regions have become prime targets. Russian forces unleashed waves of drones, deliberately overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses. Once those defenses were strained, cruise and ballistic missiles struck with surgical precision. These attacks were not random. They were aimed at crippling Ukraine's ability to move troops, supply power to millions, and survive the deadly winter ahead. Military analysts call this strategy systemic exhaustion. It's not just about destroying military assets. It's about eroding the economic and social fabric that keeps a nation functioning, making daily life uncertain and resource management almost impossible. Each new wave of strikes deepens the resource crisis. With power stations knocked offline and railways disabled, both civilian life and military operations are threatened by escalating shortages. This pressure is spreading. If entire infrastructures collapse, millions will face not only immediate hardship, but the slow breakdown of society itself. The logic behind these attacks is clear: to paralyze Ukraine from within. By making the basic functions of life, heating, transport, manufacturing, unreliable, the adversary aims to exhaust both the will and capacity to resist. It is a calculated move to make negotiation seem futile, replacing talks with relentless pressure. But what does this total shift from negotiation to force mean for the future? What happens when survival, not dialogue, becomes the ultimate battleground? Let's break down how this new strategy is changing daily life for ordinary Ukrainians, and what it signals for the months ahead. As the engines of compromise fall silent, what future is being built in the ruins? The last flickers of diplomatic hope have been extinguished. Failed negotiations are not merely a setback, they mark the end of illusion. There is no more meaningful space for diplomatic maneuvering. The age of talks is over, replaced by the relentless roar of systematic attacks. Russia's stance is now unmistakable. It signals that only actual, tangible concessions, not formal dialogues or symbolic overtures, will count for anything. The battlefield has become the sole arena where stakes are measured and outcomes are decided. This leaves Western powers at a critical crossroads. They must choose: continue pouring resources into a conflict that grows ever more unyielding, or adapt to a new, harsher reality where the lines of battle and politics are frozen in place. Neither option offers a clear path forward. Each carries profound risks and costs. For Ukraine, the consequences are immediate and devastating. The country is thrust into a permanent state of crisis, struggling not only for military survival, but also to keep its lights on, its economy functioning, and its society intact. With every new barrage, morale erodes, resources dwindle, and public trust is stretched ever thinner. This is no longer a war of territory alone. It has become a brutal test of entire state systems, their capacity to endure, adapt, and continue functioning under relentless pressure. It is a war waged not just against armies, but against the very foundations of modern life: power grids, transportation networks, and the daily routines of millions. The risks have grown to encompass far more than front lines or political capital. What is at stake now is the survival of governmental systems and the resilience of entire societies. The outcome of this phase will shape not only the fate of Ukraine, but also the balance of stability, governance, and order across the region. So, what can actually be learned from this seismic shift? And how should both observers and policymakers respond to a world where negotiation has lost its power? To truly grasp the impact of this transformation, we need to look at how systematic attacks on infrastructure are changing daily life, shaping civilian morale, and redrawing the boundaries of resilience. If power grids matter more than peace tables, how must strategies and expectations change? In today's conflicts, infrastructure is the true front line. Securing power stations, communication networks, and supply routes can be just as crucial as holding ground on the battlefield. When entire cities are plunged into darkness or supply chains are shattered, society itself becomes a target, and resilience becomes a matter of survival, not simply endurance. Traditional diplomatic rituals lose their force when they are cut off from real leverage or mutual trust. The latest breakdown in negotiations shows, when words no longer matter, actions become absolute. This is why, in the absence of trust, gestures at the table fail to stop warplanes in the sky. Western and global responses must now look far beyond military aid. True support demands that societies themselves are ready for shocks, through rapid repairs, crisis communications, and protection of civilian morale. The ability to adapt, to keep hospitals running and homes warm, matters as much as fresh artillery rounds. This is not just a lesson for governments. For individuals and leaders alike, being prepared for systemic shocks, blackouts, information attacks, sudden supply disruptions, has become essential. The next crisis could unfold anywhere, and resilience planning can no longer be ignored as a distant concern. As these pressures mount, information warfare and public morale will be as decisive as any missile. The battle for hearts and minds is fought in living rooms, on phones, and across social media feeds, shaping how societies respond to hardship and whether they stand together or fracture under strain. Ignore these lessons, and the cycle of escalation, miscalculation, and widespread harm will repeat, again and again. In this new era, security demands a total approach, military, societal, and psychological. So what does this mean, not just for Ukraine or its neighbors, but for all of us living in an age where infrastructure is a battlefield? Let's confront the reality this new phase imposes, and what it asks from each of us. When the rules change, so must our understanding. The era of comforting illusions has ended. The collapse of diplomatic negotiations has unleashed a phase of conflict where old certainties about security, negotiation, and even peace itself no longer apply. Tonight's reality is stark. Systematic attacks are not just destroying infrastructure, but rewriting the logic of the confrontation. When power grids go dark and supplies run thin, military strategy merges with the daily survival of millions. The targeting of critical infrastructure is not simply a tactic, but a statement. The battlefield is now everywhere, and the cost of exhaustion is borne by entire societies. These events force us to reconsider what negotiation means. When dialogue is replaced by escalation and compromise by rigidity, the space for traditional peacemaking disappears. If we continue clinging to outdated definitions of security, we risk being blindsided by new forms of warfare that target the very foundations of modern life. The greatest danger now is inertia. Failing to adapt, whether as nations or individuals, could leave us unprepared for the storms ahead. Security is no longer just about armies or treaties. It is about resilience, adaptability, and the courage to see through illusions. This is not just Ukraine's lesson, nor Russia's, but a warning to all. Only those who are willing to rethink and to act will weather what comes next.